Okay, welcome back to Biology of Kundalini by Jana Dixon. We're on 82 today if you're following along in the book, Age and Kundalini. Our entire lived experience prior to an awakening goes into the making and writing of the wave of emergence. We undergo the Kundalini process to bring about substantial growth and change to the brain after full myelination has taken place. One doesn't have to be special or to be a rocket scientist to go through a Kundalini awakening. Those with sensitive nervous systems, high energy, trauma-damaged nervous systems, highly stressed, and high psychic sensitivity are often susceptible to the transformative fire. So they might be going through it sooner or quicker because of their sensitivity. Some Kundalini activity is no doubt apparent in childhood and related to growth in general, since it is the force of our life. Children indeed do experience all kinds of psychic phenomena and strange body, sense, and energy phenomena. But for a full-on awakening, the nervous system must be fully myelinated. So it has to have enough of the nerve sheath to handle it, okay, to avoid serious damage. For a high degree of charge will not carry well in an unmyelinated system because the nerves are still not yet insulated for speed. So it's just like having an electrical wire that doesn't have enough to carry the voltage, or it doesn't have enough protection around it to hold that voltage in, and every time you run energy through it, it's just going to burn out, right? So the same thing with our nervous system. If we're not, we have to be fully myelinated so that the little bursts of Kundalini that go in and cause the transformation in the cells are also telling the cells in the nerve sheath to create more before the bigger blasts can even come in. Full myelination occurs in the early 20s, and a lot of people have their first awakening at 27 to 29 years old, though that's not true for everybody. That's just a common age. Approximately 7 years after full myelination, at 27 to 29 years, is the time for the major breakaway from the family meme. This is an enormously difficult period when one is trying to work out who one is and what is reality beyond the dictates of the collective mind and family and society. This is an organic process that arises of its own accord and is not a necessary process of thinking, but an alchemical upheaval and restructuring of the brain. The tensions involved in having codependencies, enmeshments, and family dynamics made conscious is enormous. That creates a lot of tension in the mind and often sparks a Kundalini awakening or a schizophrenic type breakdown at this time. So even like as you're looking at all the family structures and dynamics in the process of awakening, that can cause like a severing or like tearing away so that you can't even look at that, right? Because there's a lot of tension in those tight-knit family relationships. There can be an exaggeration of or a rebellion from family patterns and beliefs as the matrix of the family psyche becomes more available to conscious introspection. So you can see it more when you're receiving more Kundalini. You can look at it as if from the outside and sort of decide what you feel about it, the family patterns, because your cells are even stretching. It says, there can be an exaggeration or rebellion from family patterns and beliefs as the matrix of the family psyche becomes more available to conscious introspection, or childhood patterns reach their zenith. Personally, I don't think true adulthood starts until after this crisis, and I agree. So before that, like this is the maturation process, is this awakening that highlights everything and makes you look at all these patterns, right? That's the maturation process, not a physical maturation like during puberty, but a spiritual maturation. And she also calls it the second puberty, if you remember early on. If the individuation crisis doesn't occur, the individual will remain predominantly a socially conditioned adult child with little self-will or self-realization. This individuation crisis occurs around 7 years after a full myelination of the brain. Myelination, of course, is related to socio-emotional and functional use of the brain laid down mostly in response to societal conditioning. So that when this next 7-year cycle of neuron pruning arises, there's a psychological evaluation of the brain neural networks to assess their validity and value. So you go back through and you're like, is this really what I believe? Is that really what I believe? Is this what I believe? And you literally go and evaluate all of your structures. So that's why everything seems to arise out of the woodworks at this time. Repression mechanisms are lifted, and the contents of our neurology seem to impress themselves on our minds. Since neural pruning after full myelination involves a more extreme method of axon death, a Kundalini awakening might occur in order to create the massive oxidation apoptosis and self-digestion necessary for brain overhaul. So sometimes we really have to go and like dump a bunch of patterns. So that's like a massive oxidation, she says. This is especially so if the individual experienced chronic deviation, rejection, or abuse, or developmental deficiencies of some time during their first 27 years. So if there's some chronic deprivation, rejection, abuse, or a developmental deficiency, then you could go through a whole like massive brain overload at one time that can kind of like dumb you out for a little while Kundalini is restructuring. The Kundalini cycle probably follows the 7-year neuron growth cycle that Joseph Chilton Pearce pointed out, and this is probably attributed to the 11-year sunspot cycle. Remember we talked about yesterday how sunspots often affect the Kundalini awakening. Further research will probably find that we all go through a 7-year neurodetoxification cycle that might show up in changes in mood states, mania, depression, or behavior. Also, some may call the 7-year itch. A full-on Kundalini cycle is a more obvious version of a developmental process that is usually subterranean, passing without noticing. Okay? So you could have this developmental process going on but not noticing it, but when Kundalini comes, it really amplifies or makes it louder. So depending on the set point of the hyperbolic extremes, the symptoms may be observable or not. Because of the natural homeostasis feedback mechanism of the body, a Kundalini awakening proceeds as a play between the sympathetic and parasympathetic sides of the nervous system. However, it's not a fight between them, but a natural process of growth, right, that becomes observable simply because it's more exaggerated. So you go into the big aha, or the freak out expansion, and then you go into the contraction and the pulling in and the healing, and then you go into the freak out expansion, and this is like the sort of fight or expression of the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system until your body feels how to regulate that and bring homeostasis to those awarenesses, right, which are both necessary. You know, it's necessary to even touch the poles too. It says, however, it's not a fight. All growth in life may proceed in this hyperbolic fashion from one pole to the other, not so much in an effort to achieve balance between them, nor some kind of unreachable resting state of perfect equilibrium, but the polar dance itself might represent the dynamicism and dynamo of life. Thus, life, she says, is the play between charges, poles, hemispheres, and sexes. So even like that dance energy, that yin yang, that maybe we're not trying to seek total balance, but just this harmony in the play, right? To be able to enjoy and experience both. Although it appears that Kundalini awakenings begin after mature nervous system is established, there's always exceptions to the rule. For example, Ramana's first awakening was at 17. Mahir Baba was at 12. So both were obviously not fully myelinated. It might be that those who are going to be great teachers and gurus have early awakenings. Ramana couldn't help the neglect of his body during the height of the awakening because he was so gone. Also, his awakening happening when he was so young, his physiology didn't have the preparation of years of spiritual practice. Kundalini is chemistry that is prior and transposed on top of any other existing chemistry. We cannot assign a female Kundalini awakening to perimenopause any more than we can assign male metamorphosis to male menopause. Metamorphosis is the distinct, fundamental, biochemical phenomena within which age, gender, psychology, relationship, lifestyle, culture, geography, cosmic influence, those are all secondary. Everything I just listed, your age is secondary, your gender is secondary, your psychology, your relationship, all of it secondary in producing the flavor of the metamorphic experience, which is the number one thing, that cosmic life force. So perhaps within our lifetime, we will start to see the process of metamorphosis as being central to our identity as spiritual creatures. We will see how it is tied into the underlying rhythms and the drives and the happenstances of our lives. We will distinguish more clearly the predetermined life of the conditioned self, and thus we will free ourselves from the unconscious obedience to the isms that we feel prey to. Teasing apart the levels and seeing how they all interrelate, we are no longer victim to their wholesale persuasion. Thus, we are free to follow the highest call as it moves within us subatomically and prepares us for our ultimate duty, the transformation of the human species to its noble condition. Woo! Love that. So again, without age, but she does give like a general age, which correlates to the Saturn return time. That's age 27 to 29, and generally lasts about a 7-year cycle. So that could, the Saturn return, which is order in the body, right? It's time, and it's structure, and it's order. When that returns to the same point in our chart as when we're born, of course, that would make sense that the organism wants to bring balance and notes where one is and begins that myelination. That's part of the condition that the body needs to hold this energy. So very cool. Okay, tomorrow we're going to read about the phases of Kundalini, and she talks about different phases, how it goes in stages and what those stages are. So again, thank you for joining me. Biology of Kundalini. This is a short one today, Exploring the Fire of Life by Jana Dixon. You can follow along on lulu.com or get your own copy. Thank you for joining me here. If you like any support in your process, stasiabliss@gmail.com. Write a comment below, and we'll see you again.